Hey everybody, how's it going? Welcome to another video. In this video, I wanted to switch gears a little bit and talk about a recent interview experience that I had. So I interviewed with Google a few months ago, and the whole process probably took a couple months. So I kind of just wanted to walk you guys from when I applied all the way through to the final decision. For me in particular, everyone that I interacted with, the recruiter, the engineers, um, all very professional, very intelligent, great communication throughout the whole process. For me in particular, also kind of what happened at the end made it kind of a poor experience, which I'll get into at the end of this video. So obviously, before you can interview, you need to apply. So I had tried applying for Google probably like 5 or 6 times throughout the past year and never heard a word from them. I didn't even get any type of rejection letter, which kind of tells me that they probably didn't look at it because of how many applications they get. I figured there was no point in sending out any more cold applications. And then I remembered I have a friend who works at Google from grad school. So I sent him a message on LinkedIn and I was like, hey, I'm thinking about applying to Google. Do you think you can send me a referral? And he pretty much immediately responded and was like, yeah, absolutely. Google employees have incentive because if they refer someone and they get an offer and they accept that offer, the employee gets $4,000. So he definitely had a lot of incentive to give me a referral. How referrals work at Google is that you can use that referral for up to 3 applications. So you would just go on the Google website as normal and you'd pick 3 jobs you want to apply for. And then at the end, it's like, do you want to use this referral to apply for the job? And you just say, yeah. And then basically it gets attached to that referral. Now, once you have a referral attached, it goes to a special pool. And this is a pool that is a lot more selective than just the general application pool that the public sends it to. Like I mentioned before, I'd applied a bunch of times and never heard anything. Literally the day after I applied, I heard back from a recruiter, which goes to show that definitely if you're applying for Google, you should definitely try and get a referral. So the 3 jobs I applied for were 2 software engineer roles and 1 web solutions engineer role. Now, if you don't know, Google has 2 types of engineers. They have software engineers, which are the ones that work on kind of anything for like customer facing or external applications. So it could be something from like working on the Google search team or working on something Android related, etc. Web solutions engineers, on the other hand, are more for the internal tools used by other teams within Google. And it's usually going to be in the form of a web application. So I get an email from the recruiter and he says, hey, do you have time for a call this week? So he eventually ends up calling and we have about a 30-minute conversation. And he says, your previous role as a web solutions engineer fits or aligns greatly with this particular job. And we'd love to have you do a phone interview. So we set that up for about a week later and he kind of gave me an idea of what to expect on the actual phone interview. The interview had 2 parts. It was an hour long. The first part was a coding problem, and it was actually a depth-first solution problem. And the problem was, and I'm not going to go too far into the technicals during this video. I might save that for another video. I'll just give you like an overview. Basically, I was given a list of pairs, and each pair is a parent to a child. And what you have to do is you have to print out the depth-first search of that actual listing. So what you have to do is you'd have to find some kind of data structure to structure your data and then run a depth first search on it there. I wrote it in Java. For Google, they only give you a Google Doc to code in. So there's no IDE, so you don't get any like code completion, you don't have a compiler to run your code. So it makes it more challenging because there's no code completion, but then at the same time, your code doesn't have to be compiler ready. So you can have some syntax errors in there. Then the second part of the interview was actually kind of an open-ended question. Google likes to ask these type of like open-ended kind of vague questions for you just to kind of see how you approach and tackle the problem. So the question was, okay, you have a website that you're maintaining. A client calls you and says, hey, the website has been really slow lately. What do you do to, what steps do you take to kind of look into the problem? So I kind of broke it down into the different layers of the stack. I was like, okay, first I would check my API endpoints. I would maybe set like a breakpoint in the code and kind of debug and step through and to see if there's any type of error happening there. I would go to the database to see if maybe there are any types of queries and look through and maybe see if there's any way to improve the query. And then I was like, okay, maybe you can look at the front end, possibly maybe you can minify your JavaScript if it's not minified already. You could do something like obfuscate your JavaScript just to try and make your JavaScript file smaller, so when it gets sent from the server, it can get sent and loaded faster. Finally, I was like, maybe there's nothing wrong with your web app. Maybe it's a scaling issue. Maybe just you have too many users and you need to do something to try and scale your app horizontally or vertically. Then he left me some time at the end. I asked him a few questions and that was the entire interview. What I noticed throughout the process was Google engineers are very poker faced. So you don't really have an idea of if you did well or poorly. The interviewer called me up probably about a week later and he asked me how I did. And I was like, I felt like I did really well on the first part, felt like I could have done a little bit better on the second part. Because I know with Google, like, especially with them, if you're not perfect, usually you're going to get a rejection. However, the recruiter was like, yeah, you did pretty good. We want to have you come in for an on-site interview. So I was like, super hyped. I was like, okay, yeah, awesome. I would love to come in. We decided to set up the on-site interview for about 2 weeks into the future. It was going to be technically 4 interviews, but one of them is just a lunch interview, which doesn't count. So it was really like 3 interviews. The first one was going to be like web tech, API design type question. The second interview was going to be a behavioral type question. They call it to check your Googliness, whatever that means. And the third interview was a coding problem. So I got there the day of the interview. It happened to be like the hottest day of the year. And so in Mountain View, it was like 105 degrees. So I get there, I meet with my first interviewer. He was also a web solutions engineer for YouTube. And this was going to be the like system design, web design type problem. So it was a few parts. The first part was, so when you're typing on Google search, you type in a few words and then it gives you like an autocomplete with a list of a bunch of different phrases. So he was like, okay, how would you implement that? Recently, I had been studying tries. So I know that tries are very good for prefixes. So I was like, okay, so what I ended up doing is creating 2 tries. The first one was going to be to complete an actual word. So when they're actually typing and they're in the middle of a word, I would complete that word. And then I would use another try to take that entire phrase and use a try for where each node is a word and it maps to another word. And if you don't know about tries, you can look into that and it'll make more sense. The second part of the interview was describe to me what a REST API was. And then it was also, it was actually the same question as the phone interview. It was like, what would you do if a website is slow? So I was super prepared for both of these. So answered it really well and pretty much nailed the first interview. So I felt really good about that. After that, I had a 1-hour lunch. So this was kind of a off the record interview. It was kind of, to ask the interviewer if I had any questions and kind of give me an idea of what the culture was like there. So like I mentioned, it was super hot. So we didn't really walk around anywhere. We kind of just went straight to the kitchen. The amount of food that Google has, or just everywhere, is pretty insane. I think their motto is like, we don't want any of our engineers to be more than 100 feet away from food, which is pretty nuts, considering how big the actual complex is and how many engineers they have. So yeah, the food was really good and just had some time to ask questions. So then I get to the second interview. This is with another web solutions engineer, and this is the kind of situational behavioral interview. So it was kind of almost like a story, the way that he was asking it. He was like, okay, so you and an engineer have a disagreement. One engineer wants to rewrite a really old application. You're the more experienced engineer. You know that if he does this rewrite, it's probably going to break something. How do you handle that situation? And then I was kind of like, I would list out all the pros and cons and kind of weigh all the options out. And then eventually I was like, if we really are like gridlocked and can't come to a decision, then I would escalate it to a manager. And then the next part was, okay, so they end up going with him to rewrite the application and it ends up actually breaking. Like, you ended up being right, like, what do you do now? And I was like, I wouldn't, I kind of put my ego aside, even though I was right, and kind of try and see how I can fix the situation, things like that. So that interview I did also felt like I did really well in, and so through the first two like actual interviews, I was feeling really good. So finally, I got to the third interview, and it's the last interview, and this is going to be the coding challenge. So I get there, and the interviewer had to go out of town actually. So it was done through a Google Hangout. So there was a lot of technical issues during this interview. It took us probably like 10 minutes to even get everything set up. And it was already only a 45-minute interview, so it was kind of cut to like about 35 minutes. So the problem was a two-part problem, and it was designing a class having to do with you have a matrix and then being able to get the values of a submatrix within that matrix. So initially it was get the sum of that submatrix in linear time, and then the second part was trying to get it in constant time. So for the second part, I was able to come up with just a general algorithm how to solve it. Like verbally, we discussed how it would work. But then when I tried to jump into the code, I just like did not have any time to write it up. So pretty disappointed about that. But was hoping that, did well enough on the other interviews, and I did well enough in this one that I would get an offer. So my recruiter reaches out to me a few days later, and he says, I got feedback from your interviewers, and it looks like you did pretty decent. So I'm going to go ahead and submit it to the hiring committee. Now, if you don't know, Google does things a little bit different after the on-site interview. First, they have like a packet of your entire application with your interviewer feedback and everything, and they send it to a hiring committee. Once you pass that, then you have to find a team to match with. And then once you do that, then it goes to offer review. So they submitted my application to the hiring committee. And then about a few days later, my recruiter contacts me and he's like, I have excellent news from you. You went ahead and you passed the hiring committee. Congratulations. So at this point, I was like super hyped. I knew that was like really like the hump that you need to get over. That was really the hard part of the entire interview process. So after the hiring committee, like I mentioned, you need to go through the team matching phase. And how this works is your recruiter will set up 30-minute, what are called Google Fit calls. And this is just to kind of see kind of what your strengths are and weaknesses are, and kind of to see if it's a good match for the team that you're going to be on. So I had my first team match with a team that works in legal operations. So they work with a lot of the lawyers and the law team at Google to build out whatever web applications and internal tools they need. So we have the call, it lasts about 30 minutes, and I ended up not matching with that team. So my recruiter let me know that there's another team that's interested in me as well. Have another fit call, 30 minutes, and this was more about the recruiter or the manager of that team kind of selling me the position, which was a lot different than the first call. But the way that she was explaining it was like, it's more of like a SRE, DevOps type position, which I wasn't too interested in. But I ended up, saying that I wanted to be a part of the team, because once you're in Google, it's pretty easy to switch after. I think you have to be with the team for a year, and then it's pretty easy to move internally. So, my recruiter calls me like probably an hour after that fit call, and was like, yeah, the manager is like super excited. She really liked you, and she really wants you to join the team. And I was like, yeah, that's awesome. Like I really, I felt like it was a good, like I had a good vibe from her and everything. So yeah, I'm absolutely interested. So my recruiter was like, okay, yeah, I'm going to go ahead and submit your packet to offer review. And he's like, it's still possible to get rejected, but at this point, it's really rare. In my mind, I'm like, okay, I got this in the bag. Like I was super excited. Kind of was watching like YouTube videos on like what it's like to work at Google and like things like that. Probably shouldn't have been doing that, but I don't know, I was excited. So the next week my recruiter calls me, and at this point I'm like, okay, I'm gonna get an offer. I was just kind of like waiting to hear that. My recruiter calls me and he's like, I have an update for you, and unfortunately we are not able to give you an offer for that team. And at this point, I was like my heart like sank to my stomach, and I was just like, oh my God, like it was really disappointing. I was like, okay, like, do you have a reason why or anything? He's like, yeah, there's something external that came up, and at this point, we can't offer you a position on that team, and we can't disclose the reason why. And he was like, I'm gonna still like kind of try and see if there are any other managers on web solutions teams that are interested in taking a look at you. But he was like, since the web solutions engineer role is a very niche role at Google, it's gonna be kind of hard. And you're also competing with internal Google employees, which have a priority over you. Basically, he was like, it's not looking too good at this point. So I was like, okay, let's reconnect next week and see what happens. So he calls me the following week and he's like, basically, yeah, I mean, I couldn't really find a team for you. I think at this point, it's best that I close your application, and I recommend applying once you have 2 to 3 more years of experience. So I thought that was kind of strange. Like usually they're like, okay, wait 6 months or wait a year and then apply again. But the fact that it was like, wait 2 to 3 years was kind of strange. At that point, I was kind of over it. I kind of knew like there's gonna be bad news. So, I kind of accepted my fate at that point. And that was it. He was like, okay, it was sorry that I didn't work out for you, and kind of let's connect in the future. Best of luck. So that was it. So obviously I was very disappointed. Google is probably like my top 1 or 2 places that I've wanted to work at, and I wanted to work there for a long time. But these things happen. Luckily I had a job offer somewhere else, which I ended up taking. And I really felt like I did the best I could do. I felt like I did well enough to get the position. I'll never really know why they didn't end up giving me an offer. But these things happen. I wanted to share my experience with you just in case. I know a lot of us have had, probably pretty much everyone watching this will have had some kind of interview that they went through and got rejected when they felt like they could have got the position. But the most important thing is to keep moving forward, keep trying to get better every day, improve your craft, and it'll all work out in the end. That's all I have for you guys in this video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Let me know if you want me to make more videos like this, because I do have other on-site interviews that I've gone through that I would love to share with you guys. So yeah, if you're still watching, that's awesome. Thank you. And please like and make sure you subscribe, and I will see you guys in the next video.